Racial segregation controlled every facet of life in America following slavery during Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era. So much so that it controlled where people could live, work, and where they could be buried once they died. And during their lives, the plight of African Americans or Negroes or blacks in this country, during their lives, if they spoke up, if they dared to speak up or tried to form a union, they risked their lives, ladies and gentlemen, and sometimes they even died, hundreds at a time. Hey, today I'm talking about history hidden in plain sight. I'm in Cabbagetown, Atlanta, named Cabbagetown because this is an area of town where individuals who are generally poor would plant cabbages and other vegetables in their yards to make their dollars stretch. Many of them lived in housing connected right here to this mill. They call them the stacks today, I believe, but these particular mills tell a story about racial segregation in Atlanta and America, and its history hidden in plain sight. So let's dig in. You read this marker about Jacob Ellis in the Fulton Bag Cotton Mills. And so the story goes, he was an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant, came over and lived in the North, later in Ohio, later up in Cartersville, and saw a need for bags and other things that cotton needed to be distributed. And so you see, he came here, and when he got here, there was a shortage in manufactured bags. And so this was the actual bag mill, a mill that created bags and other things for the cotton industry and the agriculture industry. The interesting thing about it is that he created housing, and there was housing right around here where the employees could literally wake up and go to work. Remember, I talked about the work conditions during that day. The Pullman porters, for example, worked over 20 hours a day sometimes and paid very poorly. And when they wanted to unionize, it took a long time. In fact, they couldn't. Well, there was a strike here in around 1914 and 15. It was a nationwide strike because work conditions were very bad. But this strike was primarily whites. At this time, blacks were not able to join respective unions and unionize. And so what happened here is that individuals wanted to go on strike. White men wanted to go on strike because there were about 20 black women that they wanted to be fired. They felt like the black women were being paid a lower wage, and it was going to bring their wage down, as well as they felt like they were taking their jobs away from them. And so there was a strike, one of the biggest strikes in United States history. Part of that happened here at this particular mill. Well, I just want to dig in a little bit and tell that story more about what it means to have unions today. It's a great blessing. Here's why. When you look at Elaine, Arkansas, I believe it is, and you look at what happened there, there was an attempt of individuals to strike or try to form a union because they were sharecropping and they wanted fair wages. I remember hearing a story about someone saying that, hey, I earned $500. They said, yeah, well, you earned $500. That's what your crop was worth. But because you use certain materials and items that I supplied you, you actually owe me money because in all, what you borrowed from me was actually $600. So in fact, you owe me. And so those were the types of conditions individuals working for. Well, one night they met at a church, and the story goes that when they met at the church, they were talking about how they could potentially pool their money together, get lawyers, and start somewhat of a union. Well, white individuals found out about it. They saw the meeting that night. They approached the church. They had guards at the door kind of protecting them during their meeting. And some way, somehow, shots were fired. Well, in the midst, ladies and gentlemen, a white man died. It hit the papers that black men were, and the black community was rioting in the uproar. They brought in troops, and they brought in troops to basically quash the riot. Well, there was shooting, there was killing, and at a certain point, the whites had came through and basically killed over 200 237, they say 237 individuals ultimately died. They tell the story about the aftermath of it when most of the killing had ended. And they said they brought in the military. When the military commander, if you will, who's in charge, took a look at everything, he said, well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks just like it's mostly a whole bunch of white people here, very few blacks, and the white people are armed. Well, when blacks felt like it was safe to come out of hiding, they had been hiding, they sort of ran into the hands of the troops looking for protection. And guess what? The troops opened fire on them. So this happened all because they wanted to unionize. In the same way that there was a national strike, African Americans couldn't do that. They couldn't earn those fair wages. And in fact, during this time, a lot of times you couldn't get a job unless you were part of the union, and you couldn't be in the union unless you were black. And so Cabbagetown is here, one of the historic neighborhoods, popped up in Atlanta around the same time as some of the others that you're familiar with. Adair Park, Mechanicsville, Summerhill, Peoplestown, I'm missing one, Pittsburgh, where my family is actually from. And so these are some of the original neighborhoods. Individuals who were black would not have been able to live in these houses. They would have had to live over maybe the Sweet Auburn area or over in Pittsburgh or something like that, because again, it was segregated. Well, this individual, Jacob Ellis, he ultimately died. They say he died in around 1932 when he was buried at the historic Oakland Cemetery. Again, I talked about the racism even after death. Well, Oakland wouldn't allow blacks to be buried there. And when they were, it was in the worst parts of the cemetery. That's how we get the historic Southview Cemetery, which is located too far from here. One of the oldest stockholding corporations in the country, and I believe it's the oldest stockholding corporation with respect to black companies. But that's the story. Today we're in Cabbagetown. We're talking about unions. We're talking about segregation. We're talking about the ugly parts of the Jim Crow South, where it controlled every facet of life, where you could live, where you could work, and in some ways where you could die. Hey, I'm Joshua Teach Us. I'm talking about history hidden in plain sight. Have a great day.